All right, chapter 17. Sorry about that. Let's talk about the Renaissance madrigal. We talked a little bit about music in the church and the mass. So now let's switch over to the secular genre. In the Renaissance, music became much more of a social experience outside of the church. There was a lot of growth with music. You could have professional musicians that were hired, on the in the king's court, like we talked about. You might hire them for different festivities, festivals in the city. But there were also a fair number that did music making in the home. Obviously amateurs, but it became a central part of the home. Very prosperous homes might have the lute or a keyboard instrument, something they could use to make music, but they would do vocal and instrumental music for pleasure, for fun. And if you think about the ways that we might entertain ourselves at home, and you take away anything that was requiring electricity, that would limit it, right? So if you lived in a time where things were much simpler and you didn't have a lot of access to a lot of things, you might read, you might paint, you might play cards or another game, go on a walk, garden, and another thing they loved to do was make music. Think about this. There was no other way to hear music except for if you went to church or you were at a live performance. If you were at home, you had to make the music to be able to hear it. And so just think about what life would be like without access to music, and you can see why it was so popular at home. Um, Brief note about women in music. Again, we've mentioned this before, but music education was mainly for upper class women, women who had higher uh, levels of, I guess, hierarchy in their, where they lived. And so, really, most of the females were not going to have formal education within churches or anything like that, but they would be taught at home about music. And women were able to achieve a fame like status as professional singers. And this largely came about because of the madrigal, because remember, a lot of women were not singing in the church at this point. So you can see here this painting of four singers. They each have part books, and they're just not doing it for anyone else but themselves. They're just doing it for enjoyment. Um, so the Renaissance madrigal was something that there's two different ones. You can look at the Italian madrigal. You can look at the French chanson. Very similar in styles, but we're going to take a closer look at the madrigal. And it was music that was really based on a poem, and so that linking of music and poetry was very important. So the madrigal was the most important secular genre of the era. Secular, not sacred. We have the mass, but the madrigal was a secular genre. So, what makes up a madrigal, or how would you define a madrigal? It's based on a poem, and it would have been a vocal composition for anywhere from 3 to 8 voices, and they would each sing different parts. Very popular in Italian courts, and very popular as a pastime with amateurs in Italy. And they used books. They would take these poems, and the composers would change them, maybe add lyrics and write them into music. They'd add music to it. One of the things that's really unique about the madrigal is that they would take these words like weeping, sighing, trembling, dying, and they would use those words, which have really a picture in your mind, right? Trembling, dying, these are emotional words, and they would use the music to depict what the word meant. A lot of these madrigals had to do with love. Some of them were humorous and considered satire, political. They might be talking about the countryside or living in the city. So lots of different subjects for these different madrigals, but they all had quite a character to them. And so these are actually really popular. If you did high school music, solo and ensemble, if you were in choir, the ensemble part of the solo and ensemble, which is a UIL competition, would have been singing a madrigal. That would have been very common because it's great because it's those 3 to 8 singers, lots of tight harmony, and really unique songs. So that word painting is referring to taking those words that are really suggestive, picture like, and making the music match those words. That's what word painting is. Okay, so the music directly reflects the meaning of the words. So, for instance, death, it might be a real heavy sound. That dissonance is strong. If you're talking about heaven or stars or something, you might have an ascending melodic line. The sighing may have a slide down of the melodic line. So this was used to really express the words and enhance the meaning of the words. The early madrigal was 1525 to 1550, a little more simple, and then it later grew, it got expanded into a few more voices, and then when Claudio Monteverdi, who we're about to talk about, comes into the scene, he really brought it to a whole nother level. So this composer, Claudio Monteverdi, was very influential, and he really transitioned, when we look back at history, transitioned music history from the Renaissance to the Baroque, because he just kind of fit both styles. He kind of took us out of the Renaissance and brought in some of those Baroque elements that became very popular in music composition. He was born in Cremona, Italy, and one of the jobs he had was a court job, a court musician for the Duke of Mantua. He was also a choir master, so he directed the choir and taught. He would probably have taught the boys' choir at St. Mark's in Venice, if you've never been. It's a beautiful, beautiful cathedral in St. Mark's. And he was that choir master for 30 years there. So he had a lot of influence to the population of Italy because of Venice being such a popular place to visit. It is now, but it even was then as well. And so a lot of influence for those that came to the church and heard of different masses there. But aside from those masses, his madrigals are what we're talking about. He wrote them throughout his lifetime, 9 different books, transformed this genre to a very emotionally charged solo style. So he brought a lot of that word painting in, brought in some unique creative styles to the melodies to give them unique sounds, some of it even speech-like. His chromatic harmony was a new thing, and he used a lot of that chromatic harmony to create a richness in the music. That dramatic declamation, which we talked about with the word painting, vocal virtuosity, which means very agile vocal singers. You'll hear them moving fast and being able to move high and low quickly. That's that virtuoso meaning. And just brought that emotional intensity with all of those elements into the madrigal. Like I said, he had 9 books of madrigals. He also wrote sacred music. He wrote early operas, which we'll talk about later, and other dramatic music. The piece that you're going to listen to from him is called Si Io Vorrei Morire, Truly I Want to Die. Okay, there's a little drama for you. Remember, emotional intensity. It comes from his 4th book of madrigals. Here's a picture of him. And I want you to pay a special attention to different references like death, kissing, just these words. I want you to listen to the power of the text and hear how he uses those words and conveys them. Now, you'll have to look at the translation to know it, okay? Remember, that's on the listening guide. So look at the translation so you can follow along and see when certain words are sung, how that really is expressed in the music. You'll hear this a cappella. That means no accompaniment. 5 voices are going to be singing. This is considered through composed, which means each verse has its own new music. It's not like verse, chorus, where each verse and chorus sound the same, but it's through composed, meaning new music from beginning to end. We're still in modes. We haven't transitioned to major and minor scales yet. And you're going to hear some homophony and some polyphony. Homophony is one melody with accompaniment. Polyphony is more than one melody happening at the same time, so 2 or more melodies. So you'll listen to that. You can use this listening guide in here. You can use the text translation here. And then I want you to look at another madrigal, this one in England. During the Elizabethan era, the madrigal got very popular in England as well. So they kind of copied and developed them from the Italian madrigal style. Some of the traditions of the English madrigal would be they're much lighter in nature, a little less heavy emotionally, simpler texts. Fa la la might be a similar refrain you might find in it. So just in general, a little lighter. A lot of the art from this period is going to depict music as a pastime. You can see that in a couple of these. Here's a shepherd and shepherdess. A very pastoral scene would have been very common depiction in one of the English madrigals. John Farmer is the person we're going to be listening to. He wrote Fair Phyllis, very lighthearted. He was an English composer, actually in Ireland, and then moved to London and started writing these madrigals, published a collection of 4 voice madrigals, used lots of clever word painting, and you're going to hear him singing about this Phyllis, who's a shepherdess, and she was being pursued by her lover, Amintas. So see what you think of it. This is a cappella again. I want you to listen to the dance-like, kind of lively rhythms in this. Listen for that word painting and for the varied textures and shifts in meter. All right, there is your listening guide for that. And this is in English, but if you need the text, it's right there as well. Thank you.